Opening begins with the classic moves pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, followed by bishop to b5. This opening has stood the test of time and is played at every level, from beginners to world champions. Today, we will look at some practical ideas and hidden tactics that can help you seize the initiative early and even score a quick win if your opponent slips up. Let's get started. From this position, black usually continues with knight to f6, attacking the pawn on e4. A strong and natural response is to castle kingside, deliberately allowing black to take the e4 pawn. If black accepts the pawn, you can immediately play rook to e1, placing heavy pressure on the open e-file and targeting the exposed pieces. While black can survive with accurate defense, this setup contains several traps. One move that looks especially solid for black is pawn to d5. At first glance, this move seems excellent. It protects the knight, opens the bishop, and reinforces black's central control. However, despite appearances, pawn to d5 is actually a serious mistake when met correctly. White can respond with pawn to d3, directly challenging the knight in the center. Once the knight retreats to any square, white can safely play knight takes a5, winning material and taking over the initiative. At this stage, black's position becomes extremely uncomfortable. The rook on e1 is perfectly placed, creating threats of discovered checks once the knight on e5 moves. Meanwhile, the bishop on b5 is pinning the knight on c6, and together with the knight on e5, it attacks that knight twice. Black cannot adequately defend both threats. For example, if black decides to capture the bishop on b5, white can reply with knight to c6, delivering a discovered check on the king. On the following move, white wins black's queen, turning the sequence into a powerful tactical combination. Understanding that pawn to d5 leads to a losing position, black may instead choose a safer retreat with knight to f6. Even then, white can calmly play knight takes e5, emerging with a comfortable advantage and strong central control. Once again, the rook on e1 is the key supporting piece in white's attack. After black recaptures, the critical moment arrives. Instead of the obvious rook takes e5, white plays the unexpected and much stronger pawn to d4. The point is simple but powerful. The knight on e5 cannot move because it is pinned to the king, and white plans to capture it with the pawn, not the rook. This also puts pressure on the knight on f6, which suddenly has no safe squares and is forced back to its starting position. Black's setup quickly falls apart. If black tries to create counterplay with pawn to c6, attacking the bishop on b5, white can ignore the threat and calmly play pawn takes e5, after which black's position collapses. With cramped pieces and no coordination, black has no good options. If black captures the bishop, white simply recaptures the knight, and the rook on a 1 delivers a deadly discovered check. What looked like a normal exchange turns into a decisive advantage for white. The only possible defense against this check is bishop to e7, but even that fails. White can capture the bishop with either the rook or the pawn, continuing the attack on the king while emerging a full piece ahead. From here, the conversion is straightforward. White has several strong ways to finish the game. One effective idea is queen to d6, setting up yet another discovered check on the following move. If black's king tries to run, white can conclude the attack with the elegant bishop to h6, sealing the game with a decisive combination. White maintains constant pressure, allowing black no breathing room. No matter what black plays, white continues with queen to g3, shifting the attack toward the kingside and delivering the final blow in convincing fashion. Let's now look at another classic idea from this opening. The sequence begins with pawn to a6, forcing white's bishop to step back, which is the most common response. Black then follows up with pawn to d6, a normal developing move that also has a hidden purpose. This move opens the diagonal and creates a pin on black's knight, inviting white to try pawn to d4 and press in the center. At first, white appears to have a strong position. They are threatening to advance further or capture in the center, and the pinned knight seems vulnerable. It looks like black is under heavy pressure. However, black has a clever way to neutralize this. The key move is pawn to b5, which immediately breaks the pin. After the bishop retreats again, black begins a series of well-timed exchanges in the center, starting with knight takes d4, forcing white to recapture. The goal is simple: trade pieces and open lines. Once the center is cleared, the true idea is revealed. Black plays pawn to c5, gaining a tempo by attacking white's queen, trapping white's bishop on b3 with no escape squares. What looked like a comfortable position for white suddenly turns into a disaster. Black emerges with a decisive advantage by using precise timing and active pawn play. This idea is famously known as the Noah's Ark trap, a classic tactic that remains highly effective even in modern games. One important detail to remember is that white may try to advance the queen early, creating threats on f7 or targeting the rook on a8, so accurate move order is essential. In this position, black can comfortably deal with both threats by playing bishop to e6. This single move does multiple jobs at once. It attacks white's queen, blocks the dangerous diagonal, and allows black's queen to protect the rook on a8. With one accurate move, all of black's immediate concerns are resolved. If white tries to force the issue with a check, black can calmly retreat the bishop to block it. Should white bring the queen back to d5 to renew the pressure, black can safely continue with pawn to c4, sealing off the position and trapping white's bishop. This sequence leaves black a clear piece up and firmly in control of the game. Now let's move on to another tricky idea that is far from obvious. After black plays the standard pawn to a6, white retreats the bishop. Black then develops with knight to f6 and white castles kingside. Up to this point, both sides are following normal opening principles. If black continues naturally with bishop to c5, a setup commonly seen in Italian-style positions, white can suddenly surprise black with knight takes c5. At first glance, this capture appears to be a serious mistake, since the knight can be taken immediately. However, white follows up with pawn to d4, striking the center and recovering the sacrifice piece while gaining the initiative. This tactical idea often catches opponents off guard and throws them into unfamiliar territory, leading to rapid mistakes. In some lines, black may try to complicate matters with moves like knight takes e4. In such cases, white does not need to respond directly. Instead, moves such as rook to e1 increase pressure in the center, keep the initiative, and push the position into chaos, usually favoring the better prepared side. For example, many players instinctively respond with bishop takes d4, only to discover too late that this move fails. After queen takes d4, white emerges with a clearly winning position and full control of the game. While these traps often catch less experienced players quickly, even strong opponents can run into serious problems if they misjudge the position or react inaccurately. By around move 8, white dominates the center and controls the board with a powerful bishop pair. Black's position is under constant pressure. If the knight on a5 moves, white can immediately push the pawn forward, chasing the knight on f6 and keeping the initiative. The plan is simple and effective. Keep pushing forward while black struggles to find active counterplay. If black tries to regroup by retreating the knight to c6, white can simply eliminate it and continue the attack with natural aggressive moves such as pawn to a5 or bishop to g5, further exposing black's weaknesses. After pawn to e5, forcing the knight to move, white can follow up with queen to g4, increasing pressure on the king side while renewing the threat of bishop to g5, which targets black's queen. Black is now under serious strain. If black chooses to castle, a familiar tactical idea appears. White can play bishop to h6, ignoring the pawn and directly attacking the king. This often leads to overwhelming pressure, and in many cases, black is forced to sacrifice the rook just to survive. From here, white continues the attack with multiple strong options and maintains a decisive advantage. With correct play, this position is usually enough to convert into a win, even though, as always in chess, precision remains key.